So hello and welcome to today's revisiting of Grand Theft Auto 3. This is a bit of a special episode of Rockstar Retrospectives as GTA 3 turns 20 years old this year. So how well does it hold up 2 decades later? Well, let's find out. Now I'm going to break the video down into a few parts, talking about the story, the gameplay, the graphics and so on. Be sure to check the description for the timestamps. Now one of the things that changed for the better starting with Grand Theft Auto 3 is the booklet. Now I'm not going to do a Scott the Woz and spend 13 minutes talking about instruction booklets. That's not a jab at Scott the Woz either, that is literally his style of content. But GTA 3 was a starting point when Rockstar's instruction manuals were designed to be more like tourist pamphlets, because you had advertisements for in-game brands, descriptions of each area in the game, and even pages dedicated to specifically listing out the track list for every single radio, all worded to pretend like you were visiting Liberty City for a holiday. And to pretty much anyone in the early 2000s when the internet wasn't too big of a thing but you knew GTA 3 was insanely popular, this did an amazing job at giving you a taste of what to expect on the way home from the store. It was immersion done right, and these carried through into nearly every GTA title on the PS2. For example, the San Andreas booklet was a fat boy for that, as that went in depth into everything San Andreas had to offer. Even some of the non-GTA titles still had some tiny bonuses in them, and these sort of in-depth pamphlet instruction booklets, whatever you want to call them, I feel were really well done. And to be honest, I much prefer these over today where you just open any game and you just get a pamphlet for either buying DLC or an advert for a completely different game. What a waste of paper this is. And no, Rockstar always provided the maps of GTA on the PS1 as well. That wasn't anything GTA 3 brought to the table. But it's good to know that Rockstar still do this even in 2021. Now speaking of things that started with Grand Theft Auto 3, let's talk about the features. Because most features that were introduced in Grand Theft Auto 3 still remain even in titles like GTA 5 and Red Dead Redemption 2. For example, GTA 3 is one of the first games to include the imports and exports features, where the protagonist finds cars and delivers them to garages around the map. And this has remained in nearly every Grand Theft Auto game since. The same also applies to stunt jumps, where the player is challenged to make an insane jump and land it for some quick cash, and these stunt jumps even remain in GTA 5 and GTA Online. Another feature was the taxi, paramedic and vigilante missions, which were always optional when the player hopped into a taxi, ambulance or a police car. Once again introduced in Grand Theft Auto 3, but were quietly discontinued sometime around GTA 4 episodes in Liberty City. And it hasn't actually made a reappearance in any of the later games since, but still sort of remains in the form of dedicated missions such as bounty hunting in GTA 5 and Red Dead Redemption, or just because it wouldn't fit the protagonist's personality, like Johnny Klebitz. Now that I think of it, you can pretty much apply that to every single GTA game, because it wouldn't make much sense for somebody like Carl Johnson to be on the side of law enforcement, but you get the point. But admittedly, one thing that GTA 3 does let down upon is the lack of a proper reward for 100% completion, because there is none. And this is something Rockstar themselves seem rather bipolar on. Vice City gave you so many buffs to Tommy, and San Andreas gave you infinite ammo and a free tank and Hydra down in Grove Street. But some other games like Bully has no rewards. Neither does GTA 4 or Red Dead Redemption 1. But yet GTA 5 has an extra bonus mission for Franklin, and Red Dead Redemption 2 has a secret cutscene for the epilogue. Personally, I think 100% reward is always welcomed, and I can't believe I'm comparing these, but I'm young enough to remember getting 100% completion rewards for completing Spyro the Dragon 2 and Spyro 3 Year of the Dragon to the max, and even Super Mario Galaxy. But anyway, I'm getting a bit off topic. Now speaking of some other letdowns, money in GTA 3 is absolutely useless outside buying weapons from ammunition. Like, you cannot buy anything at all, there's no cars, and it's not needed to buy any health packs, it's only really used for weapons, and I'm glad they improved upon this for the following prequels. Although I did notice that nearly every GTA that takes place in Liberty City, these of course being GTA 3, Liberty City Stories, GTA 4 and episodes from Liberty City, money has always been absolutely useless in those games, for the exact same reasons listed just. Maybe Liberty City is just one of them places where money isn't really that big of a deal. As far as I'm aware, money's only really used to pay off Maria's ransom, but even then, I don't know why the mission payouts in GTA 3 are so massive compared to follow-up titles. Solely relying on mission income alone, the first 8 missions of GTA San Andreas you'd have about $900, give or take. Doing the first 8 missions in GTA 3 you'd have about $31,500. No wonder CJ moved to Liberty City if you can get 30 grand in a week just from driving some prostitutes around. I guess for the first 3D entry it's passable, but I still wish there's a bit more you could do with cash, especially since you have so much of it, but nothing to do with it. So when it comes to the weapons of Grand Theft Auto 3, they don't mess about. Quite a few of the weapons you can obtain are extremely overpowered, and can tear through cars like they're made of wet tissue paper, such as the M16 and the shotgun, which I personally think are 2 of the most overpowered guns in the entire game. and because of that, I feel it really amps up GTA 3's difficulty, especially in those later missions, but at the same time, can make it quite easier too. Like, if you obtain a shotgun very early on, for example getting into a police car about 10 times, you're pretty much well equipped to take on most if not all of the Portland missions without much of a problem at all. Now speaking of difficulty, GTA 3 is without a doubt one of the most difficult Grand Theft Autos, and this sentiment is shared by quite a lot of people. GTA is known for some missions being more harder than others, but speaking overall for difficulty, that is, GTA 3 tends to take the top spot. Some missions take the piss to complete, like the mission Silence the Sneak, where lobbing a grenade through the window took the piss to do. Other missions do offer the perfect amount of difficulty in my opinion, such as Rig to Blow and GTA 3's finale mission The Exchange, which in my opinion is a fantastic finale mission for difficulty, albeit incredibly frustrating. In fact, I'd say that sometimes even just casually driving around can be quite difficult. Portland turns into a complete no-go zone once you've been run out, and revisiting the area is nothing short of a death wish. The Onis will shoot you upon sight, and while this is something that was common in other GTAs, like San Andreas, Borderless and Vargos would shoot CJ upon sight, it was much more threatening in Grand Theft Auto 3 when the Leonis would blow your car up in 1 or 2 shots. Sometimes you don't even see them when you're already wasted. In fact, GTA 3 is one of those games where you should just prepare to get shot at for merely existing, because Claude makes a lot of enemies. Also, when you get wasted in GTA 3 you lose all your weapons, and while that is common in pretty much every GTA in the 3D era, there is no way to actually prevent losing your weapons unless you're using mods or cheats. There is absolutely no way you can get them back without paying a visit to Ammunition or trying to take on some gang members. And this is something that's actually been kind of dropped entirely from all of Rockstar's more modern games. In San Andreas you could prevent it by dating Katie, but starting in the HD era, getting wasted didn't really punish you, you kept all your weapons, and I felt the 3D era's way of handling it was a great addition to difficulty. Like, if you're far deep into GTA 3, getting wasted is a harsh punishment, and it kind of adds on when you're just dicking about in free mode and you accidentally drive off the face of the city. You get punished for it, and that's the end of that. Speaking of that, another really small thing that adds to the difficulty is there is no map. Kind of. You do have the radar, which is seen in pretty much every GTA that's ever made, but you can't just go to the pause menu and look at the map there, you have to learn the map by yourself, which makes some missions like Payday 4A much more difficult for newer players. Overall, the difficulty for GTA 3 isn't something to be scoffed at, and I think it's worthy of being classified as the hardest Rockstar title out there. So when it comes to the graphics, I think GTA 3 can be described as incredibly drab, unwelcoming, cold, and Liberty City is nothing more than a concrete jungle, I guess you could say. That's not a bad thing, even though it might sound like it is, because it perfectly nails the atmosphere Rockstar were going for. Liberty City isn't meant to be welcoming or pleasant, because even in the instruction booklet, they say that Liberty City is the worst place in America. Although I think Carcer City might be a bit worse, but anyway. Now, as we know, Liberty City is based off New York City, which itself is a concrete jungle, but at least the 3D era of Rockstar Games tried to make their maps more original by only basing certain parts of the map off their real life counterparts. We do have spoofs of Times Square, Central Park, etc, but they're not a one-for-one copy of the real New York City, which is actually something Rockstar would later adapt for the HD era of Grand Theft Auto, as Grand Theft Auto 4 is a much more realistic depiction of New York City, because in GTA 3's rendition of Liberty City we are missing some iconic landmarks, such as the Twin Towers, which to be fair apparently were in the game but were removed due to 9/11, so I'm not going to criticise that, but there are some other iconic New York landmarks such as the Statue of Liberty and Trump Tower to name some, which are not seen at all anywhere in GTA 3's rendition of Liberty City. So when it comes down to GTA 3's own story, I feel like I'm going to kick a bit of a hornet's nest here, but I don't think it holds up that traditional level of Rockstar storytelling we've come to know and love from them. Like, we do have quite a heavy in-depth mafia story going on here, but I don't think it carries the same weight as later entries did. The cutscenes are incredibly quick and don't give us enough time to really process characters all too well, nor the seriousness of what's going on, especially in the earlier missions. Pretty much every cutscene in GTA 3 is Claude turns up, someone tells him what to do, mission begins. This is such a sharp contrast compared to pretty much every GTA and non-GTA game Rockstar have made since. Like, let's take one of Joey Leone's missions, The Getaway. The entire mission is Claude being a getaway driver for a bank heist. This is normal enough and fits in with Grand Theft Auto incredibly well, no complaints with the mission. But the cutscene is just 3 sentences from Joey, the mission begins. Compared to even the next release, which of course would be Vice City, we'd get a cutscene of Tommy probably arguing over his pay, where he's going to find a getaway car, and maybe a snide comment about the crew he's picking up. We don't really get too much character building compared to later entries either, but thankfully quite a lot of the GTA 3 cast do make reappearances in later games, and do become much more fleshed out in them. But if we were to avoid comparing it to other Grand Theft Autos, I think the story of Grand Theft Auto 3 is told rather well for what it's worth. Much like traditional Rockstar storytelling, most of GTA 3's story transitions rather well into chapters. I'd say from when Claude joins the Leonis to when Salvatore tries to have him killed, when he runs off to Staunton Island, is a chapter of its own. We also have a pretty gritty idea of how gang politics is in GTA 3, since I'd say one of the main stories in GTA 3 would become its own overarching story for the entirety of the 3D era, and that is the ongoing Mafia War. And this is something that would be expanded upon rather heavily in the following prequels. Such as Vice City, the Forellis are looking to expand down south and build a bit of an empire down in Vice City, and San Andreas, where the Las Venturas chapter focuses on the war between the Leonis, the Sindacos and the Forellis, who each have a stake in Caligula's casino. Liberty City Stories focuses mostly on the battle for power between the Leonis, the Yakuza, the Sindacos, etc. You have to hand it to Rockstar for actually starting at the very end of the 3D era but working backwards for seemingly the entirety of the PS2 GTA era, and somehow keeping things really tight and consistent. For example, Vice City didn't have many ties to GTA 3 itself. If I remember correctly, Phil Cassidy's arm loss storyline was covered there, but nothing too big. But I did think it was amazing how San Andreas and Liberty City Stories were basically prequels to the events of Grand Theft Auto 3 and were handled really well in expanding some backstories. Like if we were to go off GTA 3 itself, we don't know much about Salvatore. We know he's a mob boss, we know he's a powerful man. But because of the following entries, we know he's a very power hungry man, even going as far as to have a rivalry with his own uncle. We also know he suffers from paranoia due to Carl Johnson pulling a heist on his casino, which led him to pull a gun on one of his most loyal henchmen, of course Tony Cipriani in Liberty City Stories. Now speaking of characters, Catalina, the main antagonist, was actually the first antagonist of the 3D era, and also the first, currently only, mainline female antagonist in GTA history. I think the betrayal scene in the first 15 seconds of GTA 3 was incredibly rushed, but really got the point of GTA 3's story down, and to the point, pretty damn quickly, and tells us that Catalina is not a woman to be trusted, and this sentiment is carried on throughout GTA 3 itself. And even though she does make an appearance in GTA San Andreas, it's heavily implied that she seems to hop from male partner to partner. We see she treats Carl Johnson in the same way, having him tag along to do her crime sprees, only to turn on him and go with a new partner instead. Though I will admit it is a bit odd as to why she clearly cannot be trusted, yet somehow stuck with Claude for about 9 years before turning on him, and then turning on her new partner in what I'd assume is probably the same month. I get it was done to be a bit of a prologue to GTA 3, but to her personality and what we know of her, it's kind of unbelievable. I feel that Rockstar themselves felt this was a bit too quick for a betrayal, and that's why future Rockstar betrayals took at least until you're about, say, 20% into the story before the reveal. Catalina herself is a fine antagonist, and does appear a healthy amount throughout the story. Now Claude, the main protagonist, doesn't have much of a personality. He's just a mute yes man, and that's just it really. I'm honestly stumped on what to actually say about him because there isn't much to talk about, pun intended. But it's safe to say that Claude has become one of the most iconic GTA characters to ever exist, even going as far as to have action figures made of him, and pretty much being constantly referenced in nearly every GTA ever since. Appearing on a poster in Tommy Vercetti's hotel room, flat out appearing in San Andreas, having his outfit be unlockable in GTA 4, and even being a parent for the GTA Online protagonist. And yes, there have been references to other GTA protagonists in other GTAs, but Claude does get the most references. We'll probably see Claude again in GTA 6 as another Easter egg. Now ultimately, in closing, GTA 3 is worth revisiting in 2021 if you can overlook the incredibly dated graphics and look at GTA 3 as a product for its time. It's still quite enjoyable and can really show just how far many of Rockstar's newer titles have come. Even if you're not overly fond of Grand Theft Auto and do prefer Red Dead Redemption or Bully, it's honestly thanks to GTA 3 why they even exist in the first place. It really did set the foundations for the sandbox genre and how it came to be, and Rockstar have done pretty well to improve upon this formula in every open world title of theirs since. Of course, some parts are incredibly rough around the edges, but it's easy to overlook and it's worthy of being up there as one of the most impactful video games of all time. But we still do need GTA 3 to come to Xbox, and Vice City. I do not know why Microsoft or Rockstar haven't bothered putting them on that platform, but either way you get the point. Put those two on the Xbox 360 and the Xbox One and the Xbox Series X. But aside from that though, that's been the GTA 3 retrospective. Thank you for watching today's video, I hope you enjoyed. Be sure to subscribe for Bully content and more retrospective looks at Rockstar titles. Thank you for watching, Have a great day.